Hi, my name's David Blissett, and in today's video, we're going to be walking through some of the work that I've recently carried out working on a highlight effect using the universal render pipeline. Okay, so let's get into it. So what you're looking at here now is a asset in the scene that responds to the user being near, and essentially a glow has been generated around the asset to indicate to the user that they should be able to interact with it. Okay, so I'm not going to be demoing the interaction in this video. The primary focus is using the universal render pipeline, more specifically, the scriptable aspect of the render pipeline. You can use the GUI to get away with a lot, but if you need to be able to deal with multiple assets being rendered in the scene as though they were one asset, you need to take a different approach, and hence that's why I went with the universal render pipeline. So like I said, there's an interactive asset in the scene. At the moment, I have the ability to come over here and I can go ahead, change the color of the glow. I can increase or decrease the intensity of the glow on the weapon. I can decrease the number of blurs, or I can increase them, and I can also change the size of the outline in the scene. All right. Okay, so how did I go about setting this up? Let me see if I can get that back to something palatable to look at. All right, I think two should do. Yeah, two looks pretty good. Okay, so how did I go about getting this going? Let's see if we can leave that on the green there. Actually, no, let's just go for the white. Okay, so that's the user interface. Now what I'm going to do is step through setting up the various cameras, because there are multiple cameras that I utilized to make this happen. So I'm just going to quickly stop the processing on that there, head over to the scene, and see if I can get the cameras out here. Okay, so do I have enough real estate here? Right. So here we have the FPS camera. This is the main camera as the player is using it in the actual game. Then we have the highlight glow camera. The highlight glow camera is an isolated camera that is essentially off screen, but it's being used to go ahead and calculate the glow. Now, I'll explain what that means in a second. And then here we have the highlight camera, which will then present the end of the calculations that take place on the highlight glow to the user. And why are we doing that? Because we're using camera stacking, and essentially I'm taking this highlight camera, placing the render that takes place on the highlight camera here, but we need essentially we need to take place on a separate camera so it can flow correctly. If you work within a graphics kind of workflow in your studio, and you're working on your game or what have you, that will make sense. Trying to explain that to somebody who doesn't utilize it would be a bit tricky. Okay, so this is base camera. The highlight glow is a standalone, so that is not actually being presented to the end user as they're using it. Let's get this one here. Oh, let's just get this back. I'm just trying to get that on the other side of that there. There we go. There we go. Now, one thing that's important, because we're using separate cameras, we need to make sure that the parameters map up for the near and far clipping plane. The whole idea here is whatever that you generate here needs to be able to not only fit over this camera, but you need the alignment of the glow to match up perfectly. So the same dimensions need to be utilized. If you're working with 1920 by 1080, that needs to happen all the way across. On the highlight glow camera, important things to note. We're working with alpha. So opaque textures, no, and I don't need any depth information to carry out this work. I am deliberately sending a solid color to it to start with. That color is a full black with 0, meaning it's fully transparent. Unless color information is presented to this camera, I don't want any additional data going on there. And as far as this camera is concerned, it's only here to be a proxy so that whatever is done can, like I mentioned earlier, be presented here. Okay. Other important things to note. Let's see if I'm going to hide the cameras now. I think that the main principle of what we're talking about so it should be understood. Okay, so because we're doing post-processing, essentially there's a series of parameters that we need to be able to set on what we call the feature path. So the feature path has been added, so I can just, do a search for it and add it here, and then the parameters that specific shader have been configured to work with are then made available. Now, before I do a deep dive on the code, just to highlight, there's quite a few shaders and quite a few materials being set here. When I started the prototype or the proof of concept set, I was thinking to have more than one shader, and in the end, I decided to consolidate the shaders into a single shader called the Uber shader. Okay, so there's a Uber shader and a Uber material. The other materials and shaders, you can kind of disregard them. It looks like a lot's going on, but that's more because it's coming from a prototype. Before we step into the code, I'm going to show you how I'm debugging what's taking place here. So it's kind of understood what some of the code is going to be hinting at. So let's go ahead and start this up again. Okay, so there we have the glow. So because in the code, you can't really see the textures, right? You're just seeing code. Obviously, we have the frame debugger available to us. So I can come in here, and I know that I have here the highlight glow camera and the highlight camera. And these are the primary ones that we're going to be working with. So let me just go over here. You must have the game view active in order to be able to preview whatever is going on here on the debugger. Right? So if I go back here, whatever is being cached is being shown here, but you must be able to, you must have the game view open for you, right? Okay, so the next thing to kind of step you through, let's have a look on this highlight glow. Let's see if it'll allow me to click on it. There we go. All right. Some of the code that I'm going to show you in a bit is going to highlight that when you're doing the highlight glow, we'll be carrying out these operations. We're going to do a matte color pass, then we're going to blur that, and then we're going to cut out the matte from the blur, and then that will leave us with this. And then here we're going to be doing a consolidation or a composite, which essentially is going to be adding the color information back to the glow, and that is how we're ending up with, well, essentially the glow feature being presented. And then after that, we're going to want to be able to take the result of this action and copy it on over to the highlight camera. And then from there, because it's on a camera stack, it's going to end up on the FBS camera. Okay. Now, we're going to segue and we're going to move into code to kind of see how some of that structure came together. So let's quickly move back over here. Now, I could go through and step you through all the codes. So there's like, almost 800 lines of code, but I've got a couple of minutes and you're not going to want me doing all of that, right? So what I'm going to highlight to you here is let's firstly zoom back to the top of this file. It's a feature. It's a highlight render pass feature. This comes to us straight from Unity, and essentially I'm just extending it with the feature that I'm working on. As you're going through the documentation, that sort of thing will kind of come into its own and it'll make a lot more sense. But we have some variables that are set to capture information from the editor so that the developer will be able to set the shader or set the materials and start the overall process that the feature has been set up to do. These settings here as well are also presented to the user, so the user can set like what's the flat color material or the blur material or what have you. But as I mentioned earlier, we're primary focus on utilizing this Uber material and an Uber shader. Okay, so let's see if I can get down to the parts that are relevant to us. All of this code is relevant, but you will be allocating and deallocating assets as you need them. So I'm not going to kind of talk through that part too heavily. I'm going to be focused on primarily what takes place on the execute operation. So here I have a series of shader properties that have been defined. So if I find an example here, so these are the shaders. There are these series of passes: pre-pass, horizontal blur pass, vertical blur pass, the cutout, the composite, and a copy, right? I'm not using the copy, I don't think. The pre-pass is a standard shader setup, but it's compatible primarily with the universal render pipeline, utilizing that structure. Here we have the attributes and what they call varyings, right? But we declare our vertex and fragment shaders up top, standard shader work, and go through. We have this section here which I sample the main texture for the color information. Because we're working with alpha, I'm saying if it's essentially 0, just return nothing, which is transparent, right? Otherwise, give me the color information. Again, very standard. I don't think if you know your shader work, that wouldn't be a problem for you. Okay, if for the non-technical audience, everything that I'm talking through now is aimed more at the technical audience. Okay, so if it seems like you're not fully understanding, it's by design. This is definitely for the techies out there. Okay, right. So these are the various shader properties, and essentially this is how we handshake with the shaders, which does the work on the GPU. Okay, so here now, this is the primary area for the work. I highlighted that we have 3 cameras, but this specific function or method is going to get called for every active camera in the scene. And for us, we only care about what's going to take place on the highlight glow or on the highlight camera, right? So let's see if we can quickly start diving through. So we come through, and on the highlight glow, we go ahead, set up some temporary essentially placeholders for whatever render operation we're going to be carrying out, or Blit operation, right? I am declaring them as temporary textures, but this one here is a member variable because I want at the end of the execution of the function for whatever happens in this composite shader to still be available. I do not want to release these resources. So here you have the get temporary RT render texture, right? And then at the bottom, we then release all of those properties or shader properties. We say, hey, whatever is pointing at that location, go ahead and clear it so we're not getting memory leaks on the GPU there, making the system essentially unstable. But for this one, I leave it because I want to make sure that it's still going to be available with the result or the composite, so that can then be written on the other camera because we're focused for the highlight glow. And then from there, it's a standard kind of workflow where we're calculating, like, the blur size and what have you. So we start off here. All right, so that's the matte color. So we've gone too far if we're looking at the blur there already. So the matte, I go through, I set the render target being that specific property. We're pushing in here the source. So these are the parameters. So we've got the source and we've got the destination. So the source is the whatever is on the current camera, which is going to be the weapon, and whatever we do in the shader ends up in that specific location in memory or in the GPU. Some kind of magic takes place at that point. So those properties being the glow color and the main text shader. If I come back here, glow color, and here we're setting a texture and we're saying this is where you can find what I want that to be stored in. You can read it if you're a techie. If you can't really follow it, don't worry about it. It's this took me a couple of days, so it wasn't a 5-minute activity, and this is not something we do every day. So we go back to the code. We go ahead and we do some calculations, and then here again we're setting the render target, but this time we're doing the blurred texture, and I've highlighted to you earlier so that by that time we are now here. We're doing a blur. We set the parameters. We set the shader pass call. This is very important here. And then we go ahead and do the Blit operation. The Blit is essentially saying go off and do whatever activity needs to take place in the shader. And then in a loop for whatever number of blur iterations, which I think might have been left at 2 or 3, we go ahead and essentially we start off pushing to this render target being the temporary version, and then that's now going to swap and become the source, and then the destination is the blur texture in a loop, right? And then from there we go ahead and we're now here doing the cutout, which would be this section here. Let's see if I can get the code up for the cutout. The blur does essentially there are 2 parts to the blur. That's why we're calling 2 sections here, right? So let's just so the temporary and then the back to the blur. Essentially we're doing a handshake and passing the same texture in a loop, but we're doing a horizontal blur pass first, and then we're doing a vertical. All right, so quickly highlight what that looks like. Again, the standard shader configuration with the parameters that need to come through. And then this specific section here, this is a known algorithm for carrying out blurs. If you were to do like a Gaussian blur or a box blur or what have you, they might vary slightly, but this kind of thing is well known about, and there are white papers for it on Wikipedia. Okay, so there's a horizontal. Note here that we're saying we're in the horizontal axis, so we're in the x-axis. And then for the vertical, we've got the y-axis, right? And then the standard UV information coming through. But again, if you're doing shader work, you'll already know this. Notice also that we're working within alpha as well, right? So again, very, very important. Even though when you look on the image, it's a black image, no, all that is transparent, okay? Right, so now we're doing the cutout pass, which is, again, standard configuration for the shaders. Again, we're working with the fragment shaders, so because it's pixel data that we're working with. So we go ahead, whatever the pre-pass is, the matte pass, that white full white, and then the blurred, and then we come through, we do some jiggery pokery where we're essentially cutting out the sections, one section from the other, and then we return the glow, the outer bit, essentially that, right? Okay, so again, I know I'm going a bit fast. Again, you'll have your own kind of use case that you're trying to apply. Essentially, I'm documenting what we're looking at here now. A week ago, this was not in my head, right? So, and a week from now, I probably won't be thinking about it at all. So it's highly important that I document what we carry out so that, you know, it's helpful to myself and anybody else out there trying to do something similar, doing, you know, post-processing effects using the universal render pipeline. Okay, so here now, we've done the cutout. I'll step you through the blur, step you through the cutout. Yes, I have. And then the final bit is a composite, the compositing, right? So the cutout calls in and we're doing cutout. And then let's open that. There we go, the composite. So render texture, we set up the target with that shader property. We clear the depth and the color information, leaving it, yeah, ready for whatever we're about to do here now. And we come in, we set the parameters, textures that need to go through. Again, some of this needs cleaning up, but it works. So hence why we're documenting. We say which pass we want this to execute against. And this is the source, the original color for the weapon in the scene. And this is the destination, the composite, right? And then from there, we do that Blit. And I found for one reason or that I'm having to do the second Blit here. It works, you know, just whatever works here. I do have this specific render. I think this is a render texture. So not a property, not a shader property like this, but an actual, is that a render texture here? Yeah, it's a render handle. There we go. Okay, and then again, like I highlighted, then we clear up the resources that we've allocated, and we end the debugging session for this specific pass, clear the command buffer, and release any resources that it's holding on to, minus this specific one, which I'll be using when the execute method gets called in again for the other camera. So let's go ahead and collapse that. And then we look on this. This is, again, relatively straightforward. Here we're saying this is going to the highlight camera. And this should be straightforward. So we're just saying, where does this information go to? In this context, we're saying, send it out to the camera color target, set the parameters that are necessary, and go ahead and then essentially carry out the Blit operation. So this here is going out to number 4 on the shader passes, which I think it could be just doing this one again. So this one here is, yeah, number 4, just doing the cutout, which is interesting. No, actually, no, tell a lie. It's a 0. It starts at 0, so 4 is 5. If that doesn't make sense, think arrays, and if you still don't get it, that's gonna, you shouldn't be watching this. Right, so it starts off at 0. So 1 2 3 4 5 in our universe, but over in shader land, if I say 4, just to prove that, the very first matte pass, this matte pass here starts at 0. So we start at 0, and now we're at number 4, which in computer speak is number 5, really. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. It's a bit difficult to go into detail on that there now. So here we go. Again, my apologies if we're going kind of quick. It's a lot of information taking a short period of time. But if you've seen the configuration for these command buffers and setting the texture variables and what have you, you're going to have your own use case. But the principle is you make sure you set the render target and also the source and the destination. And for the material, make sure you highlight what pass, if you have more than one pass, that you want to be executed. And then once you complete, then you go ahead and release all resources, clear things down. More than that, the rest of the file is, like I said, it's about setting up the configuration so that in the editor you can go ahead and make changes and have them reflected in the scene, providing that you're not doing a debugging session. So here, all right. So I walk away. Nothing's on the highlight layer, so there's nothing to process. And the way I short circuit that, so it's not always trying to write to the GPU. Let's see if I can go back to the code. At the top of the method, when it calls in, one of the first things it's going to do is it's going to qualify. One, is there a character manager that's been configured? And there's a flag, and I'm saying, is the highlight effect been activated? If it has not, then return. Don't do anything, right? And then we carry on and we make some other checks. And if those things haven't been set, if they're null, then that means that we're not ready to start the processing. So the processing, it doesn't keep on in a loop, just always trying to, well, carry out the activity. So I'm just going to quickly set a breakpoint there and prove that. So it comes down here. So the fact that it's still stepping through tells me that in the editor, I must have had a weapon or an interactive item that has been essentially highlighted. Otherwise, it wouldn't be trying to process this now. And so here we're going through the blur. It's doing it. How many times is it supposed to be doing? 4 times. I must have made some changes to this file because as it's stepping through the code, there appears to be a slight offset. But yeah, I'll still keep on executing. Obviously, this is on GPU, so it'd be going a lot faster than this. But that's the principle of it, right? So I'll just remove that breakpoint. Okay, and then we head back over to the UI. Yes, I've made some changes to code. It's recompiling on the start there. So, right, what have I not covered? I've shown you the debugger, and you can come in here. So providing I have, let's just see if I can stop that now and quickly start that up again. Okay, so if I walk away, walk up, and then the next thing that I want to do now is make sure that that's still focused. It's it's trying to take the mouse activity. So there we go. So again, we have multiple passes. This is the highlight glow camera. This is the highlight camera, and then the FPS camera will show everything as long as the action is being carried out in the editor. Right. I'm hoping this was helpful. The whole principle here is that the universal render pipeline, it's really good. It's well documented, but for the use case of doing a highlight glow, it seems like something that should be relatively straightforward. But if you're using workflows that have been around for years, then that's wonderful. One might be asking, why not just pop a Fresnel on the weapon and get something similar to what you're looking at right here now? Well, that wasn't the effect that I was going for, because doing so, where I'm just trying to get the contours of the whatever is in the scene, it gives a different effect, right? It depends on what you're after. For me, that was not what I was after. I definitely wanted to say, okay, if this specific asset has multiple parts, I don't want the glow on internals of the weapon. So to have what we have with this, it's only highlighting on the outside. And this kind of workflow is a very well established kind of workflow over the years. But again, it's not something that you do every day, and it does require that you put a bit of thought into it. And especially because the pipeline is different. It's using a different set of events. For us, I'm highlighting here. Let's just quickly. There we go. I'm highlighting here that after the render of opaque, so this is a whole pipeline here. And I'm saying after the rendering rate of the opaque, meaning anything that has color, please give this to me so I can go ahead and run those various passes on them, Blit operations with those shader passes, so that we end up with what we have here in the scene. Okay, so again, I hope this was helpful. We're going to be doing a lot more fun activities like this in the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested and you do this sort of thing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you've got any comments or feedback, or if you know a better technique or a better way of doing, a similar kind of effect with the render pipeline, I'd be more than happy to have some kind of feedback. There was no one for me to kind of to get a full steer on. That being said, I want to give a big shout out to Gary Simmons from the Game Institute. Very solid work. Been under his tutelage for like 4 years and learned a lot from him. So thank you, Gary. He showed us how to do this with the legacy pipeline. But like I said, if you want to be able to do this with the scriptable render pipeline, you'd have to follow some of what we've done there. All right. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.